Commander Jake Morrison walked into the communications center at exactly 0600 hours, like he did every morning for the past 3 years. The coffee was hot, and the morning reports were waiting on his desk. He expected another routine day of monitoring the outer colonies and checking supply routes. He did not expect to find 23 red warning lights blinking on the main display board. Lisa Parker was already at her station when Jake arrived. She looked tired and worried. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she tried to contact the colonies one by one. Each attempt ended the same way, with silence. New Eden Colony had been the first to go dark at 0200 hours. Then New Texas went quiet 30 minutes later. By 0500 hours, they had lost contact with every human settlement beyond the inner systems. Jake stood behind Lisa and watched her work. The colonies were spread across 12 different star systems. Some were mining operations on asteroid belts. Others were farming worlds with millions of people. A few were research stations with only 100 scientists. All of them were gone from the communication network. Ryan Brooks rushed into the center with a datapad in his hand. He commanded the reconnaissance ship Defiant, which had been patrolling the outer rim for the past month. His face was pale and his hand shook as he handed the datapad to Jake. The information on the screen made Jake's stomach drop. The Defiant had been near the Kepler system when New Eden went dark. Ryan had ordered his ship to investigate immediately. What they found was impossible to believe. The entire planet had been turned into glass. The cities were gone. The forests were gone. The oceans had been boiled away. Nothing remained except a smooth, glassy surface that reflected the light of the system's star. Lisa looked at the images from the Defiant and gasped. She had visited New Eden just 6 months ago to study the native plant life. 2 million people had lived on that world, families with children, scientists and farmers and teachers. All of them were gone without any warning or distress call. Jake called Admiral Kate Sullivan immediately. The Admiral was in charge of all Earth's military forces, and she needed to see this information right away. Sullivan arrived at the communications center within an hour. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen many battles. She looked at the data from the Defiant and her face became stone. More ships began reporting in throughout the morning. Captain Beth Wilson had been near the Alpha Centauri system when the attacks happened. Her ship detected massive energy readings from the direction of the colonies just before they went silent. The energy signatures were unlike anything in human databases. They showed weapons that could destroy entire planets in minutes. Dr. Carl Davis from the Science Division analyzed the attack patterns. The strikes had been coordinated across 12 star systems simultaneously. This meant the attackers had technology that allowed instant communication across vast distances. They also had enough ships to hit 23 targets at the same time. The human fleet barely had 300 ships total, and most of those were exploration vessels with light weapons. Jake studied the star charts with Admiral Sullivan. The pattern of attacks formed a perfect circle around human space. Every colony beyond a certain distance from Earth had been destroyed. The attackers had drawn a line in space and erased everything beyond it. This was not random violence or piracy. This was a deliberate act of extermination. News of the attacks reached Earth by noon. President Daniel Carter called an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly. Panic spread through the cities as people learned that millions of humans had been killed without warning. Families who had relatives in the colonies demanded answers that no one could give. The communications center became the most important place on Earth. Every few hours, another ship would report more destruction. The mining station at Titan 7 was gone. The research facility on Europa Prime had been vaporized. The farming world of New California showed nothing but glassed earth where green fields had grown the day before. Lisa worked without rest, trying to find any survivors. She sent signals to every frequency and every emergency channel. The silence from the colonies was complete. Not one person had escaped to tell what happened. The attackers had been thorough in their work. By evening, Jake had a complete picture of the disaster. Human expansion into space had been stopped cold. Every settlement beyond the inner solar system was gone. The death toll was over 50 million people. It was the worst tragedy in human history, and no one knew who was responsible. Then at exactly 1800 hours, a new contact appeared on the long-range sensors. The object was massive and moving toward Earth at incredible speed. It was not using any propulsion system that human science understood. The ship seemed to bend space around itself as it traveled. Admiral Sullivan ordered all defensive platforms to ready status. Earth's orbital weapons came online for the first time since the Mars Rebellion 30 years earlier. Fighter squadrons launched from Luna Base and took defensive positions around the planet. Every human warship in the solar system moved to intercept the unknown vessel. The alien ship stopped just outside the orbit of Pluto. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. The hull seemed to be made of living crystal that shifted colors in the starlight. It was 10 times larger than the biggest human ship and radiated power that made their sensors scream warnings. A transmission came from the alien vessel. The signal was broadcast on all frequencies in perfect English, with an accent that sounded almost musical. The voice was calm and pleasant, like someone discussing the weather. The words it spoke made every human in the solar system feel cold fear. The message was simple and clear. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Collective. They had been watching human expansion for decades. They considered humans to be a disease that was spreading too far from their home world. The colonies had been cleansed to stop this disease from growing. Earth had one choice. All humans must return to their birth planet and never leave the solar system again. If they tried to rebuild their colonies or expand beyond the inner worlds, the Zephyrians would return to finish what they started. Earth would become like the other worlds, a ball of glass floating in space. The transmission ended and the alien ship disappeared as quickly as it had arrived.
Jake looked at the empty space where it had been and knew that everything had changed.
Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their new neighbors wanted them dead. President Daniel Carter stood before the largest gathering of world leaders in human history. The emergency session of the United Earth Assembly had been called within hours of the Zephyrian ultimatum. Representatives from every nation sat in stunned silence as Carter explained the situation. 50 million humans were dead, and an alien empire had given Earth a choice between submission or extinction. General Marcus Stone walked to the front of the assembly hall, carrying a thick folder of military reports. His uniform was crisp, but his face showed the exhaustion of a man who had not slept in 3 days. He opened the folder and began reading numbers that made the politicians shift uncomfortably in their seats. The human fleet consisted of 287 active vessels. Most were exploration ships with basic defensive systems. Only 43 were actual warships, and those had been designed to fight pirates and smugglers, not alien battleships that could glass entire planets. The Zephyrian fleet that had destroyed the colonies numbered over 3,000 ships according to long-range sensor data. Stone continued his briefing with details that grew worse by the minute. Human weapons technology was at least 2 centuries behind the aliens. Their ships moved faster than anything humans had built. Their energy shields could absorb direct hits from nuclear missiles without taking damage. Worst of all, they had demonstrated the ability to coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously, which meant their communication technology was beyond human understanding. Admiral Kate Sullivan took her turn at the podium. She had spent her entire career preparing for war, but never against an enemy like this. Her voice was steady as she explained the defensive preparations already underway. Every orbital platform around Earth was being armed with the most powerful weapons in the human arsenal. Fighter squadrons were being recalled from patrol duties to protect the home system. Mining operations were being converted to produce military equipment. But Sullivan knew, and everyone in the room knew, that these preparations were nearly useless. If the Zephyrians decided to attack Earth directly, there was nothing the human military could do to stop them. The best-case scenario was that they might destroy a few alien ships before Earth joined the colonies as a ball of molten glass. Dr. Alex Morgan stepped forward when Sullivan finished speaking. Morgan ran the secret weapons development program hidden deep inside Luna Base. For 10 years, his team had been working on projects that most people considered impossible. Advanced propulsion systems that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of years. Energy weapons that could crack asteroids in half. Defensive shields that bent space itself around a ship. None of these projects were ready for combat. The best estimates suggested that Morgan's team needed at least 5 more years to produce working prototypes. The Zephyrians had given humanity no such timeline. They expected immediate submission to their demands. Morgan's presentation included something that made the assembly members lean forward in their chairs. Hidden production facilities on Earth's moon had been building new types of warships in complete secrecy. These vessels looked nothing like the sleek exploration ships that made up most of the human fleet. They were ugly and brutal with armor plating that could withstand massive impacts and weapon systems designed for close-range combat. Only 12 of these new warships had been completed, but Morgan's team was working around the clock to build more. The problem was resources and time. Each ship required materials that were difficult to obtain and manufacturing processes that took months to complete. At their current production rate, they could build maybe 50 new warships per year. Karen White from the research division presented her analysis of the Zephyrian technology based on sensor readings from their brief appearance in the solar system. The alien ships used harmonic frequencies to generate their defensive shields and propulsion systems. This meant they could theoretically be disrupted by weapons that produced the right counter-frequencies. White had identified several possible weaknesses in Zephyrian design. Their ships appeared to be optimized for long-range combat and might be vulnerable to close-quarters attacks. Their elegant construction suggested they valued aesthetic beauty over practical durability, which could be exploited by human weapons designed for maximum destruction rather than artistic appeal. The assembly session continued for 18 hours as experts presented one grim report after another. Earth's population of 8 billion people was essentially defenseless against an alien empire that commanded thousands of worlds. The technology gap was so vast that human resistance seemed pointless, but President Carter had made a decision before the session even began. He stood once more at the podium as dawn light filtered through the assembly hall windows. His voice carried clearly to every corner of the room and to billions of people watching on screens around the world. Humanity would not submit to alien demands. They would not abandon their dreams of exploring the galaxy because some crystal ship empire thought humans were a disease to be contained. Earth had faced extinction before from ice ages and asteroid impacts and nuclear weapons. Every time they had survived by fighting back against impossible odds. Carter announced the activation of every defense protocol in human military doctrine. Factory ships would begin converting civilian vessels into warships. Mining operations would focus on producing weapons and armor. Every human with military experience would be recalled to active duty. The entire economy of Earth would be transformed into a war machine focused on one goal, which was the complete destruction of the Zephyrian collective. The announcement sent shock waves through human civilization. Stock markets crashed as investors realized the economy was about to be militarized. Families began stockpiling food and supplies, expecting the worst. Some groups demanded that Earth surrender to avoid total annihilation. But most humans supported Carter's decision. They remembered the images from New Eden and the other glassed colonies. They thought about the 50 million people who had been murdered without warning or mercy. The Zephyrians had made the mistake of thinking humans would roll over and accept defeat. They were about to learn that some species fight hardest when they have nothing left to lose. General Stone activated the global mobilization protocols within hours of Carter's speech. Military bases that had been closed for decades were reopened and equipped with the most advanced weapons available. Retired officers returned to duty and began training new recruits in tactics designed specifically for fighting superior enemies. The transformation of human society began immediately. Scientists abandoned peaceful research to focus on weapons development. Engineers designed new ships built for war rather than exploration. Miners worked triple shifts to extract the materials needed for humanity's survival. Admiral Sullivan knew the odds were still impossible. The Zephyrians had thousands of years of technological advancement and resources from hundreds of conquered worlds. But she also knew something the aliens did not understand. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things that were bigger and stronger and more dangerous than they were. Now they would apply those lessons to enemies among the stars. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks climbed into the command chair of the warship Vengeance for the first time. The ship was one of the new vessels built in the secret facilities on Luna Base, and it looked nothing like the elegant exploration ships that had carried humans to the stars. The hull was thick armor plating painted flat black to absorb sensor scans. The weapon systems were designed for maximum destruction rather than precise targeting. Everything about the ship screamed violence and death. Amy had volunteered to lead the first human offensive against the Zephyrians. Her orders were simple and brutal. Find enemy ships and destroy them by any means necessary. Take no prisoners and show no mercy. The aliens had started this war by murdering 50 million innocent people. And now they would learn what human anger looked like when unleashed among the stars. The human fleet consisted of 57 ships, including 12 of the new warships and 45 converted civilian vessels. Each converted ship had been fitted with the most powerful weapons that human engineers could design. Mining lasers became ship killers, cargo holds were filled with nuclear missiles, passenger compartments were converted into fighter bays carrying small attack craft. Admiral Tony Phillips commanded the fleet from his flagship Retribution. Phillips had fought in the Mars Rebellion and understood how to win battles against superior enemies. His strategy was based on lessons learned from centuries of human warfare. When facing a stronger opponent, you did not fight fair. You used every dirty trick and underhanded tactic available. You turned their strengths against them and exploited their weaknesses without mercy. The target for the first offensive was the Zephyrian outpost at Proxima Centauri. Intelligence reports suggested the aliens had established a monitoring station there to watch human space and ensure compliance with their ultimatum. The outpost was defended by 6 Zephyrian warships, which should have been more than enough to destroy any human force stupid enough to attack. Amy studied the tactical displays as the human fleet approached the Proxima system. The Zephyrian ships were positioned in a perfect defensive formation that would allow them to support each other with overlapping fields of fire. Their elegant crystalline hulls gleamed in the light of the red dwarf star. They moved with graceful precision that spoke of centuries of military tradition and advanced technology. What the Zephyrians did not expect was the human approach to space combat. Admiral Phillips had studied every piece of sensor data from the destroyed colonies and identified patterns in alien behavior. The Zephyrians fought like they built their ships with emphasis on beauty and formal structure. They expected their enemies to engage in organized battle formations where superior technology would guarantee victory. Instead, the human fleet scattered into dozens of small groups and attacked from every direction at once. Mining ships loaded with explosives rammed directly into Zephyrian vessels, while fighter craft swarmed around the elegant alien ships like angry insects. Nuclear missiles were fired at point blank range where Zephyrian shields could not deflect them. Effectively, Amy led her squadron in a series of hit-and-run attacks that confused and frustrated the alien defenders. Her ships would appear from behind asteroids to fire a few shots, then disappear back into the debris field before the Zephyrians could respond. When the aliens tried to pursue, they found themselves separated from their formation and vulnerable to concentrated human fire. The battle at Proxima Centauri lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian outpost. 3 alien ships were destroyed outright, while the other 3 were damaged so badly they had to withdraw from the system. The human fleet lost 18 ships, including 2 of the precious new warships, but they had achieved something that seemed impossible just weeks earlier. They had defeated Zephyrian forces in open combat. News of the victory spread through human space like wildfire. For the first time since the colonies were destroyed, people began to believe that Earth might actually survive this war. The aliens were not invincible gods of destruction. They could be hurt and killed and driven away if humans were willing to pay the price in blood and sacrifice. Dr. Helen Carter made a breakthrough that changed everything about human strategy. Her team had been working on quantum tunneling technology for peaceful purposes, but the war gave their research new urgency. They discovered a way to move ships instantly across vast distances without using the normal space lanes that could be monitored and defended. The first test of the new technology was successful beyond all expectations. A single human scout ship disappeared from Earth orbit and reappeared near the Zephyrian home system 12 hours later. The scout was able to gather detailed intelligence about alien defenses before tunneling back to Earth with information that would guide future attacks. Commander Pete Johnson volunteered to lead the new stealth squadron equipped with quantum tunneling drives. His mission was to strike at Zephyrian supply lines and civilian targets, using the same tactics the aliens had used against human colonies. If the Zephyrians wanted to fight a war of extermination, then humans would show them what true extermination looked like. Johnson's first target was a Zephyrian supply depot that supported their military operations in 3 different star systems. The depot was considered completely safe because it was located deep inside alien-controlled space, where no human ship could possibly reach. The crystalline station orbited a beautiful blue star and contained enough resources to supply the Zephyrian fleet for months. The human attack was swift and merciless. Johnson's ships appeared without warning and began destroying everything in sight. Supply ships were vaporized along with their crews. Storage facilities were blown apart, sending debris spinning into the void. The elegant architecture that the Zephyrians loved so much was reduced to twisted metal and broken crystal. But Johnson was not satisfied with destroying military targets. He had studied the intelligence reports about Zephyrian society and knew that their civilization was built on the belief that they were superior to all other species. Their beautiful cities and perfect artwork were symbols of their alleged superiority, so Johnson began targeting those symbols with the same ruthless efficiency the aliens had shown at New Eden. Zephyrian art galleries were bombed into rubble. Cultural centers that had stood for thousands of years were reduced to ash. Museums containing artifacts from dozens of conquered species were destroyed along with their contents. Johnson wanted the aliens to understand that humans could erase their precious civilization just as easily as they had erased human colonies. The psychological impact of these attacks was enormous. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrians experienced fear and helplessness. Their perfect worlds were burning, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, leaving only destruction in their wake. The Zephyrian High Command sent urgent messages to their fleet commanders demanding immediate action against the human threat. They could not understand how a primitive species had developed such advanced technology so quickly. More importantly, they could not accept that their own superior civilization was being systematically destroyed by creatures they considered barely above animals. Captain Lucy Adams stared at the massive Zephyrian homeworld through the viewport of her flagship destroyer. The planet was even more beautiful than the intelligence reports had suggested, with crystalline cities that sparkled like jewels across continents of perfect gardens and flowing rivers. Billions of aliens lived on that world in harmony and peace that had lasted for 10,000 years. In 6 hours it would all be burning wreckage. Adams commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled for a single operation. 500 warships surrounded the Zephyrian home system, including 50 of the new heavy assault vessels that had been built specifically for this mission. Every ship was loaded with the most destructive weapons that human science could produce. Nuclear bombs and plasma cannons and kinetic projectiles that could crack continents apart. The Zephyrian defenders had positioned themselves in elegant formations around their homeworld, just as human strategists had predicted. 3,000 crystalline ships moved in perfect synchronization, creating defensive patterns that looked more like an art display than a military formation. They still believed that superior technology and graceful tactics would be enough to stop the human invasion. Admiral Frank Miller coordinated the attack from his command ship while studying real-time displays of Zephyrian movements. The aliens were reacting exactly as expected based on months of combat experience. They formed neat battle lines and attempted to engage the human fleet in organized warfare, where their technological advantages would be decisive. They had learned nothing from their defeats at Proxima Centauri and dozens of other systems. The human attack began with a massive wave of nuclear missiles fired from maximum range. Thousands of warheads streaked across space toward the Zephyrian fleet, while human ships scattered into smaller groups to avoid the inevitable counterattack. The aliens destroyed most of the missiles with their defensive systems, but enough got through to damage several ships and disrupt their perfect formations. Lucy Adams led her squadron in a direct assault on the Zephyrian command vessel. The enormous ship was a work of art, with flowing curves and crystal spires that captured and reflected the light of the system's star. It was also the nerve center that coordinated the alien defense, and its destruction would throw their entire fleet into chaos. Adams had learned from months of combat that Zephyrian ships were vulnerable to close-range attacks where their long-range weapons could not be brought to bear effectively. Her squadron used quantum tunneling drives to appear directly alongside the command ship and began firing at point-blank range. The elegant crystalline hull cracked and shattered under the brutal assault of human weapons designed for maximum destruction. The battle for the Zephyrian home system raged for 3 days as human forces systematically destroyed everything the aliens had built over millennia. Beautiful space stations that had served as centers of learning and culture were blown apart by nuclear explosions. Orbital cities that housed millions of civilians were targeted and destroyed without mercy. The humans showed the same consideration for Zephyrian civilians that the aliens had shown for human colonists. General Paul Walker commanded the ground assault forces that landed on the Zephyrian homeworld after the orbital defenses were eliminated. His troops were equipped with powered armor and energy weapons that turned them into unstoppable killing machines. They moved through the crystalline cities like a plague of destruction, leaving nothing but rubble and corpses in their wake. The Zephyrians had never experienced ground combat on their homeworld. Their perfect society had been protected by their space fleet for thousands of years, and they had no idea how to fight an enemy that had actually reached their cities. Their elegant architecture provided no protection against human weapons, and their peaceful civilians had no training for the brutal realities of war. Walker's forces targeted the symbols of Zephyrian civilization with special attention. The great library that contained the history of their empire was burned to the ground along with its contents. Art galleries that displayed masterpieces from hundreds of conquered worlds were bombed into rubble. The Council of Elders that had ruled the alien empire for centuries was dragged from their crystal palace and executed in the public squares. Dr. Maria Davis accompanied the ground forces to document Zephyrian war crimes for the historical record. What she found in their archives was worse than anyone had imagined. Hundreds of species had been exterminated by the Zephyrian collective over the past 10,000 years. Entire civilizations had been erased from existence because they dared to expand beyond their home systems or refused to submit to alien rule. Davis discovered detailed records of the methods used to destroy other species. The Zephyrians had perfected the art of genocide and taken pride in their efficiency at eliminating what they considered inferior life forms. They kept trophies from their victims, including artifacts and preserved specimens that were displayed in their museums like hunting prizes. The evidence of systematic extermination convinced any humans who might have felt guilt about their own actions. The Zephyrians were not innocent victims being destroyed by human aggression. They were mass murderers who had built their perfect civilization on the bones of hundreds of dead species. Every burning city and every killed alien was justice for crimes that stretched back across millennia. As Zephyrian resistance collapsed, their leaders finally understood the true nature of their enemies. Humans were not just another primitive species to be catalogued and exterminated. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who had climbed to the top of their planet's food chain by being better killers than anything that opposed them. Now they were applying those same skills to enemies among the stars. The Zephyrian High Council sent desperate messages to human commanders offering to surrender and make amends for their crimes. They promised to restore the destroyed colonies and share their advanced technology. They offered to serve as subjects of a human empire and pay tribute for their past actions. They begged for mercy and forgiveness from the species they had tried to exterminate. Admiral Sullivan received the surrender offers and studied them carefully before transmitting her response to the Zephyrian leadership. Her message was broadcast across the entire star system so that every alien would hear and understand. There would be no mercy for genocidal murderers. There would be no forgiveness for the destroyers of worlds. The Zephyrians had chosen to be predators among the stars, and now they would learn what it meant to become prey. The systematic destruction of Zephyrian civilization continued for weeks as human forces eliminated every trace of the alien empire. Their beautiful cities were reduced to ash and rubble. Their elegant spaceships were cut apart for scrap metal. Their perfect society was torn down and scattered to the cosmic winds. By the time the human fleet finished its work, the Zephyrian homeworld looked exactly like the human colonies had looked after the alien attacks, a ball of glass floating silently in space. Colonel Ben Taylor walked through the rebuilt streets of New Eden Colony exactly 5 years after the Zephyrian attack that had turned the world into glass. Human engineers had worked for 3 years to restore the planet's atmosphere and build new cities on the foundation of melted alien rock. The colony was now larger and stronger than it had ever been, with a population of 5 million, people who refused to forget what had happened to their predecessors. The memorial plaza at the center of New Eden was carved from a single piece of crystalline material taken from a destroyed Zephyrian warship. The names of every human who had died in the original attack were etched into the black crystal surface. Families came every day to place flowers and remember loved ones who had been murdered without warning or mercy. The memorial served as a reminder that some crimes could never be forgiven. Dr. Jennifer Lewis documented the transformation of former Zephyrian space for the historical archives. Hundreds of alien worlds that had been sterile monuments to their own superiority now bloomed with human cities and farms. The elegant crystal spires that had housed the alien empire were being converted into factories and research facilities. Beautiful gardens that had been maintained by slave labor from conquered species were now worked by free human colonists. The galaxy's surviving species watched humanity's expansion with a mixture of awe and terror. Word had spread quickly about what had happened to the Zephyrians, and every alien government understood the implications. Humans were not content to simply defend themselves. They had taken over an entire empire and shown no mercy to their enemies. The species that had once dominated space was now extinct, and their former territories belonged to Earth. Ambassador Rachel Stone represented humanity at the newly formed Galactic Council that met on the neutral world of Sanctuary Prime. The council had been hastily organized after the fall of the Zephyrian Empire as surviving species scrambled to establish diplomatic relations with the terrifying new power that had emerged from a small blue planet. Stone listened to their nervous speeches and formal greetings with cold amusement. Most of the council members had remained silent during humanity's near extinction. They had watched the Zephyrians destroy human colonies and offered no assistance or even moral support. Now they wanted to be friends and trading partners with the species they had abandoned to face genocide alone. Stone made it clear that Earth remembered exactly who had stood by during their darkest hour. The Rigelian ambassador spoke for an hour about mutual cooperation and shared interests in galactic peace. Stone responded with a simple question that made the entire council chamber fall silent. Where had the Rigelians been when human children were being burned alive on New Eden? The ambassador had no answer, and the message was received by every species present. President Susan Clark addressed the survivors of the Zephyrian War from her office in the rebuilt White House. The original building had been damaged during the panic following the alien ultimatum, but human engineers had restored it as a symbol of their determination to survive. Clark's speech was broadcast to every human settlement in what had once been Zephyrian space and to the refugee camps where former aliens now lived under human supervision. The surviving Zephyrians numbered less than 10 million, scattered across a dozen labor camps on remote worlds. They performed hard manual work under the supervision of human guards who showed them exactly the same mercy they had shown to previous victims. The elegant beings who had once considered themselves gods among insects now learned what it meant to exist at the mercy of a species they had tried to exterminate. Clark explained that the camps were not permanent prisons but rehabilitation facilities where former Zephyrians could earn their continued existence through honest work. Those who accepted responsibility for their empire's crimes and demonstrated genuine remorse might eventually be granted basic rights as protected persons under human law. Those who refused to acknowledge their guilt would remain in the camps until they changed their minds or died of old age. The process of earning forgiveness would take generations and required the complete abandonment of Zephyrian culture and beliefs. Former aliens had to learn human languages and adopt human customs. They had to study the history of species their empire had exterminated and write detailed confessions of their participation in genocide. Most importantly, they had to raise their children as loyal citizens of humanity who would never again threaten other species with extinction. Commander Jake Morrison stood before the memorial wall at Earth's deep space, command exactly 10 years after the first colony attacks. His hair was now gray and his face showed the lines of a man who had seen too much death and destruction. The wall contained the names of every human who had died in the war, including the 50 million colonists who had been murdered in the initial Zephyrian assault. Morrison remembered the fear and helplessness he had felt when the first reports of silent colonies reached his communication center. Humanity had seemed doomed to extinction by an enemy they could not understand or defeat. Now human ships patrolled 1,000 star systems and alien species, begged for permission to trade with Earth. The transformation had been complete and terrible. Children played in the memorial gardens around the Deep Space Command building. They ran between captured Zephyrian artifacts that served as playground equipment and monuments to human victory. These children had been born after the war and knew the aliens only as defeated enemies whose crystalline ships were museum displays. To them, humanity's dominance of the galaxy seemed natural and permanent. Morrison watched the children play and wondered what kind of future they would build. Humans had proven they could survive anything the universe threw at them and emerge stronger than before. They had turned their greatest defeat into total victory and their near extinction into galactic supremacy. But power came with responsibility, and Morrison hoped future generations would remember the lessons of the war. The galaxy was no longer ruled by elegant aliens who believed in their own superiority. It was ruled by humans who understood that survival required strength, and that strength required the will to use it without mercy when necessary. Other species could choose to live in peace under human protection, or they could follow the Zephyrians into extinction. The choice was theirs, but the consequences would be final. The stars belonged to humanity now, and Morrison knew they would never give them up. They had paid too high a price in blood and suffering to win their place among the stars. The memorial wall reminded everyone who passed through Deep Space Command of a simple truth, that the galaxy had learned the hard way. Humans did not forget, and humans did not forgive. They wiped out our colonies, so Earth erased them from the stars.